Yeah, I would like to welcome you all to our seminar series. Actually, this is part of the new division of Environmental and Population Health Biosciences, and we established this Emerging Environmental Health Challenges Seminar Series. So today's lecture is a little bit in a broader content. It's not focused per se on a specific environmental health challenge. It focuses on sustainability. And more importantly, what we do as part of the higher education, a higher education institution in education in and for sustainability. And I'm delighted and honored to have Wendy Purcell visiting us today. She is one of the global leaders in sustainability in education and for sustainability. She's from Harvard School of Public Health and Harvard Extension School, where she's leading programs in this domain. There are discussions at the School of Public Health here at Rutgers and across Rutgers on sustainability, and as part of this discussion for also moving this sustainability moving forward, I reached out to Wendy and make sure she's one of our speakers on this topic. I also would like to welcome our online participants from across Rutgers. I know there are people from the School of Engineering, because we reach out to them, and also from the School of Public Health. So that's one of the first thing we have to do in terms of changing our perspective in sustainability. Sustainability means we have to abandon this vertical modus operandi that we focus in one area and we really need to do things very holistically. For the sake of time, and actually, I'm not going to go through Wendy's CV.
Thank
you. She's a emeritus professor of pharmacology from UCL in the UK, emeritus president of a university. She's an amazing and prolific writer, a number of books in this domain, papers. So, I don't do any favor to her if I start reading what we put here in terms of this. So, welcome to Rutgers, welcome to UTSI, and look forward to your seminar.
Thank you so much. We're measuring the applause at the end. So can I thank Phil and Helmut and Nancy for making me feel so welcome. Thank you so much. All of you online, thank you for joining. All of you in the room, thank you for joining. Wendy Purcell, as Phil said, I'm going to talk to you about higher education, sustainability, and the SDGs. We should have some time at the end for some questions and provocations and discussions. So let me just start really by saying what we do here matters. And I think never more than before. I think Jeff Sachs said it really well, that the opportunity for universities to connect, to partner with business and society, to take on some of the challenges of sustainable development and to think about working on some of the most exciting problems of our day, it really does matter. So I always, when we talk with higher education, it's just to sort of spend a moment to think, actually what we do here really does matter. And if we can show up in new and different ways now going forward, I think it will be really exciting. So part of the role really of a university in this space is to think about how we're transforming people, the amplification that we get through our students, the opportunity, I think, to really help transform society at large. And we're doing it in the context of these global megatrends, everything from losing trust in organizations, politicians, everything through to seeing a brand new refugee crisis unfolding before our eyes. And of course, the climate crisis, climate change is here. So this is the context in which you're operating. And you're seeing that turn up in the Global Risks Register, the 2022 register. You can see everything from climate action through to debt crisis and everything in between. So this is the context in which we're operating. And we know that this climate crisis is multiplying, I think, the known disparities in society. It really is exacerbating those disparities in a way that we saw, I think, very powerfully during COVID, as the global pandemic revealed to us disparities in very many different ways. Things that we maybe knew about, things that we maybe were ignorant of or chose to ignore, and then some new things. And so, all of these mega trends and risks are impacting on higher education. So I took a look at this with some colleagues, a while ago now, to think, how is this playing out as we think about our path as higher education through to 2030, mapping and lining up with Agenda 2030. And we came up with a whole range of different things that we were facing as higher education, everything from urbanization, that we see here, through to unemployed and underemployed graduates in terms of capacity imbalances. And then I think we have to add to that now some of the new things that we're learning from the COVID crisis. Hybrid, we're hybrid now, thinking about seeing the individual, personalization, value creation. So I think, the overarching kind of construct is we're living in so-called VUCA times, defined by volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. Some people have even deemed these, hyper VUCA times, because, the changes that are happening across so many fronts at one time, I think it's unprecedented. So there's always been change, there'll always continue to be change, but there's never been change across so many fronts at one time at such pace. So this opportunity to think about this VUCA environment that we're both operating in, but also, I think, creating a space for our students and learners. So one way of orientating ourselves through this space is to kind of go back to thinking about our purpose as higher education, and thinking about how can we create value to the benefit of the society that we serve. And one way of doing this, I think, is to really think about how we can, connect what we do with those that we serve. We're seeing this in students. We're seeing the way that students are navigating, not necessarily by subject domain, but by thinking about the kind of impact, the kind of purpose that they want to follow. And I think this is where we can really think about our mission. We do three things. We do teaching and learning, we do research innovation, and we do all the other things around civic community engagement. And if we think about those three pillars, really, of higher education, and take a lens to those three pillars, and use that lens of sustainability, the SDGs, just to look at what we do here, take a look at that through that lens of sustainability. So I talk about it as putting our SDG or our sustainability goggles on and kind of looking afresh at our teaching and learning, looking afresh at our research, our innovation, and obviously our civic and community engagement. And when we do that, what we find is we see new opportunities. I think we see new ways in which we can position higher education as part of the solution, as a critical path, really, to creating a world, where no one's left behind, that ultimate outcome measure of the SDGs. So we can think about sustainability, the Sustainable Development Goals, with all the caveats. We can think about that as an opportunity to reposition higher education and reconnect, I think, our three pillars and our disciplines in very interesting ways. We took a look at this just after COVID had waned from that first kind of space, and thought, how is it that higher education is able to lean into this post-pandemic, or this, as we move into the endemic, and think about how we're navigating the disruptions, the complexity of these times, but by orientating us around a core purpose of sustainability. And so that was an interesting dive, and we saw new leadership models, new internationalization agendas, new ways of thinking about what we do here. So rather than kind of get lost in the complexity of the SDGs, I really like Ban Ki-moon's approach, which talks about the connections among them. As we think about lifting people out of poverty, as we think about economic growth, we're also thinking about how we save our planet. We're looking at the connections among people, planet, prosperity in a really interesting way that starts to ask us to hold in dynamic tension different issues and adopt a kind of both and lens. So rather than getting lost in those goals and the targets and who was at the table and actually who wasn't at the table when they were being drawn up, let's think about them as the nearest thing that we have to a strategy for our world. Let's think about, as I say, that outcome measure of creating a world where no one's left behind. But more importantly, rather than thinking about them as individual boxes, let's think about them as a connected, nested agenda. This is where it gets very exciting, I think, for universities. Instead of thinking about individual disciplines, let's think about the way that they connect and collide in interesting ways, but still retaining that disciplinary focus. So here under the kind of, on one side of the panel, you'll see someone has taken the trouble to map the different targets underlying the SDGs and showing the interconnections and those interdependencies. So as you lift people out of poverty, if you invest in education, you see the kind of outcomes and the influence, the ripple effects across those SDGs. And similarly with the Stockholm Resilience Centre's approach and taking those boxes and showing the way that a healthy economy is nested in a healthy society, and that has to be held up by a healthy planet. So it's showing those interconnections. And again, I think for us as faculty, it's starting to think about the interconnections among our disciplines and how we can connect them in really new and interesting ways. So let's look at those three pillars. Let's think about what we do here. So looking afresh at our teaching and learning means that it starts to show up opportunities around how might we use our campus as a living laboratory? How can we think about education for sustainable development? How can we think about the cooperative and engagement with business and the community in different ways? What's in our curriculum that needs to be carried forward? What's missing? What programs might be missing? How might we really lean in and play our fullest part in this agenda? So we can take a look at some work that I do with engineering, which is through the European University, ELISA, a group of universities across Europe coming to develop a new European engineer that's focused really on addressing these grand challenges defined by sustainable development. And the same in the US, a lot of work with Engineering for Change is positioning the SDGs as a core purpose and then saying, okay, if that's our destination, what do we need to do now to better equip our engineers for today? So that's through the American Society. Similarly, in work that I've done when I was down in Plymouth in the UK, was how can we engage our teaching and learning space within the community? So take full advantage of social enterprises, where we set up our dental clinics, how we actually educate our medics. So really thinking about what new things are we seeing as opportunities to tailor what we do to the benefit of society. So it brings in new things, it brings in issues of entrepreneurial thinking, it brings in issues of ethics, it brings in, I think, really adopting a global mindset. So operating locally, but connecting to that global agenda. Now, in this, critically, our students and our alumni, and these really are forces for change. They are kind of a quanta of change agency. And what we're seeing is students are trying to navigate some of our programs, some of our courses, some of their learning experiences in very, very different ways. And sometimes finding that our constrained programs or opportunities are not giving them the kinds of experiences that are setting them up for the kind of impact they want to have and the change agency that they need to adopt. So I think that engagement with students and leaning into really what they're looking for as well, thinking about the market. So around employability, setting them up for success throughout life, recognizing, underneath this agenda is a whole focus on innovation, entrepreneurship, intrapreneurship, ways of doing things differently, connecting the dots from a linear to a kind of systems thinking. I love this, I thought I would share it with you, but it's a job description for students, graduates who are focused on sustainability as change agents. But we're just saying this is your job. Your job is to help change the world by changing the systems in which you live and work, preventing collapse, increasing prospects. I mean, what a compelling opportunity to think through. This is the kind of new industries, new jobs that we're setting our students up for. So I think it kind of relies on us now to think, okay, we have a group of students who are navigating this new space, thinking about new industries and new jobs, who are looking to retrain, to upskill, to reskill, to think about pivoting their careers, whether it's a pivot around purpose, whether it's a pivot because the old industries are changing and they're wanting to set themselves up for the new industries. But I think there is a sense that you will be learning throughout life. The idea that we finish kind of formal education at 21 is going to look laughable. It probably does now. So when we look at the other pillar then around research and innovation, we're looking at how this agenda brings to us, yes, those global challenges around climate crisis, but how is that showing up locally around the ecosystem in which our university operates? So looking very much at the local communities, the local businesses, the challenges, and connecting that local to global. And I think we are working then on the most compelling research questions of our day. We're working in an innovation and knowledge powerhouse to really be part of the solution, part of the new knowledge that we need, but also how that knowledge is applied. So a couple of universities, this is one from Yale, have done a kind of fairly basic mapping exercise just to look at what research are we doing here, how does that map to the global agenda of Agenda 2030, the SDGs. That was done under the International Alliance of Research Universities. Carnegie Mellon has just done its second review now. So just finding the kinds of work, because this is my new agendas. Our faculty, our researchers are working on these questions now, just surfacing them, connecting them, making them visible, often to funders, sponsors, donors, and students. So this is a really nice way of just saying, look, we're already doing this stuff. We're doing so much of it, but maybe this is a new way of presenting it. The same around civic and community work is how can we connect the campus? And I was driven around the campus by Phil this morning, it's like a small town. How can we connect all those resources and assets to the community that we serve, the city, the rural? How can we connect it to our country and indeed beyond? And actually look for interesting ways to do that. So one opportunity that I championed was around Community Research Awards, which was inviting research questions from the community and partnering those with those in the university and thinking about, that's a good thing to do, being a sort of responsible citizen as a university. But many of those projects, local, hyper-local, went on to be nationally and indeed internationally relevant. So it was everything from what's in our river, can you tell us, all the toxins, and we can go talk to the city council, up to something like this, which was about creating dementia-friendly communities, which went local and then went national, became a material part of the UK's agenda. Similarly, I was involved with creating, I think, one of the largest investigations and reports on how do universities contribute to sustainable, I kept putting the word sustainable in the report, sustainable economic growth. How can we play our fullest agenda, particularly when we're looking at that city region as being that kind of model of growth. So that Whittier review was a really important part of that work. So we're looking really at this construct of universities as kind of anchor institutions, part of place, reflecting the context and the local challenges, reflecting those comparative assets of place. So if you look at Rutgers and the comparative assets of the hinterland, the agribusinesses, the community, the farmer sector, you can start to see that the approach that Rutgers will take to this agenda is really contextualized by what Rutgers prizes, its values, its knowledge, its faculty, its sense of inquiry. I think we are, as I said, the ultimate outcome measure of the Sustainable Development Goals is a place, a world where no one's left behind, and that is fundamentally rooted in justice, in equity. And then you're thinking about the relationships that we enjoy as faculty, as professionals in universities, and how can we create partnerships which are value-creating partnerships by working with others. So that sense of really recognizing our anchor responsibility. I'm going to give you a couple of examples from some of the research that I've been doing. One is how, this was in Madrid, how a master's program within a university, so that was the academic innovation, how the development of that master's program as a collective endeavor, rooted in one school, but a collective endeavor across a university, how that master's program led then to some new governance mechanisms, a structural innovation, which helped that curated space become a thriving place for conversations, and how that really started to transform the kinds of partnerships, the research questions, the opportunities for students, just through a simple faculty-led academic innovation, which then influenced the broader university, influenced the broader hinterland. So it's a really, really good example of a new academic program having this ripple effect across the university and out with the university. That model took on more complexity as some of those partners emerged to be working with a city on its climate neutrality, working with businesses that were transitioning around their energy. And you start to see a simple, kind of academic endeavor of a master's linking and rippling out now to helping climate neutrality in one city, but joining up with other climate neutral cities as part of their agenda. And then it gets more complicated again when this same academic innovation starts to create clusters of work that is really saying, can we connect actors as a kind of trusted broker? One of the most underutilized assets of universities is our ability to convene people, convene conversations, curate dialogue, create spaces for learning. And here you see a university at the heart of this ecosystem focused around Sustainable Development Goals. And we bring so much to that agenda. We took a look also at this model of the living lab. And so I compared Harvard and the work that Harvard was doing in this space with the American University of Bulgaria that I was working with also the university that I led in the UK, and just looked at the very many different ways in to this agenda. And I think what you find is there's no one way. And so, what Rutgers brings to this agenda with its unique ecosystem, its unique faculty, its unique value set, will be very different and very distinctive from what other universities might do. And that's, I think, the excitement about how can we bring our strengths as a university into this space. So this living lab model allows us to translate, educate, amplify, It's a really powerful, flexible model that says, let's put the question in the middle of the table and let's gather around interested parties to really focus on concerns that have different perspectives, which rely on different disciplinary approaches. So this kind of brings us to a space that we're really, I think, recognizing the local and the local context of place mattering in this agenda, and how we then connect that with other universities through all sorts of networks. And I'm connected to, I think, most of them in the US. So thinking about our contribution, how we create these global partnerships and create opportunities for global citizens as well through our students. So the agenda sits really comfortably with the connected university, and this idea that I talk about with Jack Spengler at Harvard, which is radical collaboration. How can we radically collaborate from our disciplinary plinth and recognize that it's not about kind of getting rid of disciplines, it's about how can we bring them together in unique combinations around a sense of a shared purpose. That could be a shared question, that could be a shared agenda, it could be, you know, something that relates to sustainability as a broad construct. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples from work that I've done just in the last few minutes, and then I feel mentioned about some of the writing, and I'll share that and also issue an invitation. So I've done a lot of work in travel and tourism. I'm not a travel and tourism expert, but what's really compelling about this is it sits at the confluence of so many of the agenda around sustainability. So it sits, yes, around profit, it sits around conservation, the immersive experience of place, the sense of sustaining culture, food, the way that tourists use, you know, so much more water, so much more natural resource, over tourism, destroying the very thing that we go and look at. So as a sector, when it started before COVID, at 10.4% of GDP, it's a very large sector, very disparate. It's a great lab, really, in which to explore sustainability. So this is one of the programs I teach at Harvard. So it's we did a responsible tourism research agenda and picked up everything from, you know, science-based targets, to sustainability leadership, to circular economy, using really the vehicle of travel and tourism. Just taking that word vehicle into work I've done with the auto sector. This is using a framework, which I think is a framework of sustainability that sits really comfortably with public health. So this was a project led by Howard Koh at Harvard. There was a link between the School of Public Health and the Harvard Business School. And it really came from this provocation that every business is in the business of health, health of consumer, health of employees and those in the supply chain, health of the communities in which they operate and where their products or services are used, and health of the environment. And we used the auto industry, which sits again as a kind of crucible where these four pillars of a culture of health, ostensibly a framework for sustainability. It's a wonderful laboratory to look again at how they're navigating social justice issues about underserved populations with respect to electric vehicle infrastructure, to those that are exposed the most, through to issues around employee health, well-being, flourishing. So it was a great laboratory in which to explore culture of health, but bring that unique perspective of higher education. And then finally in this space, some work I have led with leaders on purpose. So this is corporate leaders who have placed sustainability as a core platform alongside their focus on developing profits as well as people, and understanding from them, who are on the kind of front line of some of these dialogues and tensions among these pillars of people, planet, profit. So everything from insurance through to banking, through to Orsted that made that big energy transition, hotels and everything else. So it's a wonderful up close and personal with these CEOs and getting those insights on the language that they're using, the approaches that they're using, and the challenges I think that they're facing. So from Natura, you can see the kind of way that they are recognizing, just really simply, you can't run a business on a dead planet. So, just a very simple truth, but recognizing this sense of purpose, which is articulated as being sustainable, really shows up. And then wonderful James from Equity, just really thinking about how can they as a bank really think about this idea of shared purpose and shared sense of shared value. And so I did some follow-up work with Equity Bank as they started to really elaborate how they were talking about this, but they were relying upon higher education as being able to hold the complexities of how disciplines collide, the literacy that they need to be able to articulate what the issues are. So I think we have a huge role to play working with business. So just to tell you about an upcoming book that I'm sure you'll want to look out for. It's published next year, delivered end of January, 10 days early, yes. So in terms of marshalling academics towards a sense of delivery, tick. So in terms of this is going to be the handbook from Bloomsbury Publishing, which is really taking sustainability as the agenda for transformational change. And it is awash with 24 chapters, 67 authors who are from across the globe, from my friends at the American University over in Lebanon and in Beirut, through to MIT, through to McGill. There's a whole host of people in Nepal. It's just a wonderful privilege, frankly, to work alongside authors who are approaching sustainability in higher education as an agenda for transformational change in so many different ways, from entrepreneurial programs through to large-scale pan-institutional strategic shifts, so everything in between. So it was just a great opportunity to work with that group, and it really was the springboard when Phil was talking to me for this talk, is to say, yeah, well, we do all the stuff we do within our institutions. We're changing our programs, we're thinking about our research in different ways, we're thinking about how we respect disciplinary identity, but bring disciplines together in unique ways to really marshal our assets in novel ways to address these issues. And then the second part of the book really looks at those kind of partnerships that are being created by university, connecting, I think, very deeply with others in cities, in business, in community settings. And so it's an interesting approach. I had the privilege and challenge of starting with a blank piece of paper that said conclusions at the top, and trying to distill out the kind of lessons from across those global examples of those 24 different chapters, many more examples than that. And it really was a couple of things I just wanted to not go through all of them, but just to talk about the importance here of context and place. So the agenda in this space for Rutgers will be uniquely differentiated and distinctive than any other institution because of the context, the history, the assets and place-based assets. So I think that's, for me, a very exciting agenda to think how is this space going to be occupied when Rutgers comes fully into this agenda. The other one was the sense of students, is really recognizing the kind of mega trends impacting on students, that purpose being the new major, that sense of upskilling, reskilling. I think that really came through very strongly. And I think there were a couple of other issues which we kind of looked at which matter. And I think one of them was universities maintaining their critical analysis and reflection on what's not working in this space, what's wrong with the SDGs, what needs to happen differently. So that critical kind of articulation of this space in different ways, finding new language, new means to communicate complex messages that touch people. So the role of the arts, the communications. It's a really interesting, I think, opportunity to think about this. And then I want to tell you about the next thing that's going to keep me out of mischief for a while, is 17 Books project. So this is with Emerald Publishing. So they really have orientated their entire publishing group around the sense of sustainable development in its broadest construct. And so they have commissioned a series of 17 books, so higher education and the SDGs. And I have the privilege of being series editor and working with a host of editors now to bring this agenda forward. But critically here, it's also bringing the student voice as a very distinctive part of this series, is bringing that through. And that sense of students as agents of change into that. And I thought I'd just introduce you to a couple of my editorial advisory board members and now editors. So we are actually meeting tomorrow under the University Global Coalition session to talk about the book series a bit more. But so Angel Cabreras is the president of Georgia Tech, and he's going to be my editor for book 17, Partnership for the Goals. Ambassador Professor Sarah Mendelsohn, who's at Carnegie, will be looking after SDG 16. Former colleague of mine from Plymouth, he's Welsh actually, Professor Simon Davis will be looking after Life Below Water, aquaculturalist global. So Julio Lumbreras from University Politécnico Madrid will be looking after SDG 11. So Kudishi Kalsoon from Pakistan will be looking up for gender equality. And then the president of University of Pretoria, Tawane Kupe, who's going to take a fantastic approach to look out for SDG book 4. So that's the first 6 in the series ready for the off. And then just to point you to a resource that we produced through the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, and that was how can we accelerate this agenda for universities and the SDGs, and more broadly, actually sustainable development and sustainability. And so we produced this guide, which is, being downloaded a lot. And in that, there was a section on the transforming of universities. And we're now going to take that piece of work. We have a task group now to take the transforming of universities for this agenda, to take that into the next work. So finally, I think on time, to give us time for questions, is just to recognise, I think, how vital universities, higher education generally is to deliver against the sustainability challenges, some of which are articulated through the SDGs. That we do this from our standpoint, from our academic mission of what we do here, our teaching and learning, our research and innovation, the way that we engage in civic and community settings. And it's through this partnership, I think, with public, private and plural organisations that we can really realise, some incredible academically sound, robust, quality engagements and contribution to knowledge. And that's that way that we kind of connect with society. And so I think you are seeing universities really, I think, connecting much more to the societies that we serve. And I sort of finish where I started, which is that, what we do here, and in this context, the we as Rutgers, what Rutgers does in this space really matters. So I'll leave you with that as your kind of call to action, and then expose myself to your interrogation and your provocations and challenges, but also your reflections as well. I'm super interested in in those conversations. So Phil, I'm going to hand back to you. And
open the discussion from people in the room, and then we will go to the people online. So Ken, please.
Yeah, I can't think of anybody more qualified to answer this question. What is sustainability?
oh yeah.
I mean, one of the,
It's a really good question, because there is no widely, kind of global definition.
that's the problem.
I don't think it's a problem. I think it's a great opportunity, because I mean, you can use the Brundtland definition of stewardship. That's the one that gets trotted out a lot. But I think it becomes, for me, it's not so much a destination. So sustainability is really a kind of aspiration.
But what's the aspiration?
The aspiration is to, I think, be able to steward the resources, human, natural, and other, in a way that is respectful, doesn't use them up so they're not there for future generations and so on. So, the number of books that are written about, defining this thing, it's huge, and that's kind of exciting because people are bringing very, very many different constructs to it. But it does feel, and I think through the SDGs, it does feel like it's rooted in a sense of balance, of trade-offs, and this is, trade-offs and dilemmas that we have to face in different ways, and that we surface in different ways. And so I think they can be extractive, and you see that in tourism, but then there can also be reparative activity. And so there's something about, I don't kind of want to use the word of kind of balanced scorecard, but there's something about this kind of dynamic tension that we hold these, particularly these three pillars of people, planet, profit in, that somewhere in that is a sweet spot that we would kind of recognize as, yeah, this can carry on. This can be sustained in that way.
Well, the danger that I see, and I think this is great, but what I see is it's always dangerous to support things that are too easily half understood.
Yeah, I understand that.
And so when people are rallying around sustainability, the question is, what are you rallying around? A bumper sticker, a flow diagram, or a philosophy?
I think that's a very fair challenge, and that's why I think in that sense of the conclusions from the book is that we have to, I think as universities, I think you're pointing to this, is we have to continue to be the critiques. We have to be, that reflective space and hold people to account and say, but actually that, that doesn't really do it. That doesn't really show up there. But people are showing up in this space because they recognize something about seeing the last one of those. They're showing up in this space because they are really concerned about the differential impact of COVID on different communities. So they're pointing. So they're showing up in this space for all sorts of very good reasons. And there's something about that umbrella of sustainability that is a gathering space. But there is no, I think, one definition that all of those people will sign up from. What you are finding is, I think when you kind of go back through them and you look at them, is there's something about inequity that's taking them there. And there's something about concern for the stewardship space. So there's a couple of things that I think you kind of draw out, which kind of values that are connecting them, but no one individual, even if you go back to them over time, Monday through Thursday or whatever, their definition, if you like, will change. I don't think that's a bad thing, but I think there's something in and amongst that which is a shared value set, which I think is very appealing in that construct.
But it has become very nebulous, so people I totally agree with you.
It's become nebulous, but it's also become a barrier because people are like, oh, the S word, no, I'm not really interested in energy transition. I'm interested, and so it's become a real barrier. So many of these conversations, we never use the words at all. We never say, we talk about resilience, we talk about adaptation, we talk about risk mitigation. And so using a very different language. The S word, as you say, is both nebulous and off-putting. And by the way, sorry, what do you mean by that? And it's a very hard question. So,
especially for a scientific community like
yeah,
this.
absolutely.
Well, there's a lot of space under the tent, and
masses of space under the tent.
in a Jesuitical sense, this is all things to all people. You know,
So,
it has that potential.
Yeah, I agree. I understand.
Sure. Yeah, Nancy.
Yeah, and I think that's what I'm struggling with, because all of the things that you've outlined have been values and principles of many people in universities and in religious organizations, you name it. And so I wanted to get a little concrete if we could, because when you were talking about the shared values and purpose, and you had all those different CEOs up there, and I was thinking about the banks and or car companies, for example. I'm sure that Volkswagen has put up some really wonderful sustainable goals, and yet they cheated on their emissions. And I guess, you know, so often businesses just capture the space and the words, but there's nothing behind it. And I think that's true for universities as well.
I agree.
Because at the end of the day, money drives everything. Let's face it, even in, you know, authoritarian communities. So
I think we can all go to that. What about, there's one bad actor or 12 bad actors out of 13. I understand that, but I think there's something about, people calling out the greenwashing.
Yeah,
you just done it. Volkswagen is, you know about it. I know about it. We all know about it. We know about companies where their supply chain, is effectively, slave labor. We understand that. So I think we're talking about greenwashing. We're now seeing a whole people kind of hiding under the SDG flag. And there's different kind of washing going on there. So I think there's definitely that. And I think there are for sure, some universities that are in this space who are saying, well, this is the latest kind of trend or zeitgeist. But actually underneath that, there's, I think, a broader community who are saying, we actually are working on issues which matter around sustainable agriculture or issues of social justice, or we want to really understand, the economy in this space or the science in this space. We need new solutions for the climate crisis. So there's all of that going on too, and then frankly, there's more of that going on than the bad actors. And I think within our kind of community around the 24/7 and the social media and everything, these people get called out. They get called out more quickly now. The kind of sense of conscious consumerism, which is a real trend now. You're seeing that in the Great Resignation, so-called, of COVID. Well, actually, that isn't someone I want to share my talents with, that type of organisation. And you're seeing it with students too. So I think we're in this kind of transition period of somehow positioning it, and I think, talks like this too, seeing it as somehow a discretionary agenda that we can opt into or not. Yeah, so it's like, okay, I'm going to look at that, I'm going to critique it, and I'm going to see if I want to join it or not. And that's kind of not what this is about. This is going to become just the way we do things around here. Because frankly, the current path is unsustainable. If we can't define what sustainability is, we can probably define what unsustainable looks like. And therefore, it isn't a kind of discretionary agenda. It is going to influence how we think about our courses, our research. It's going to create new opportunities. And I think that's the kind of mindset that I kind of want to bring to it is, let's look at this afresh and think about this rather than, as we do, I think, brilliantly always, as faculty is argue with the exam question, if that makes sense. It's kind of okay.
Yeah.
So my understanding is that Harvard has had a program in sustainability for a while, and you've played a major role in that. What does that look like? What does the curriculum look like? What are you teaching?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I don't know the currency that you use here, but it's in 12 blocks. So that's the full masters. And I think really importantly, and it kind of goes to your question, is there is a spine of compulsory to kind of core courses, and that is sort of setting up the fundamentals of this space, the language, the literacy, kind of models, the frameworks, and so everybody does that. And then there's a suite of modules that you can follow depending on your own curiosity. And I was talking earlier with one of the colleagues here about being able to follow your sense of curiosity. So it could be that you can follow, the core science modules because you're really interested in climate adaptation or climate and public health. You can follow others which are around new economic models and new leadership models. There are other modules where you can follow things around law or food security. So what students can do, and then they out with either a full research thesis, a consulting project, so a real consulting client, either in business or community settings, and or a capstone project and some more electives. So it has real flexibility, but I think what's been really good is it also has signatures around graduate certificates, which are stackable towards a master's. So a student can come in, do the core courses, take something that makes sense to them from their professional, personal issues, and then continue along through the master's, or they can stop at one point with a graduate certificate. And I think what's really important about it is that the program is rooted in one school. And it allows that firm anchor, that spine, if you like, of the program to take on that flavour of that school, but to then be a kind of invitational space for other faculty and other courses around the university to contribute to that space. And then the student is sitting as the recipient of all of that different input and different disciplinary kind of architecture and methodologies, and that's the melting pot, becomes that student experience. And so it's a very flexible model.
So are the core courses sort of a, case studies of successes and failures and challenges, or how?
So one core course is really all the fundamentals around sustainability and the language and the climate crisis and the global goals and all of that kind of literacy that you need to be able to operate in this space. And the other one is really the critical evaluation skills that you need to hold to account, to look behind the greenwashing, to really kind of get behind this in a way that makes sense, where it is the real kind of critical analysis that we bring as higher education. So that's that part of it. And then you can go off on your journey of curiosity around the other spaces. So it becomes a curated journey, but it has flexibility in that.
Yeah, Michael.
Well, this is very interesting, and I very much appreciate that you've presented this in a way that's aspirational and approachable. You can actually get your hands around a program, even if you can't get your hands around sustainability itself. And I give a lecture, which I'm going to rename now Unsustainability.
Yeah.
It's about ecology, food, and war, and comment that the next 1 to 2 billion mouths that come to Earth are all going to be in countries that are already food insecure. So I sort of came into this with the idea that we only use the word sustainable when we know it's not. So now the question. This is the 50th anniversary of the Club of Rome report, Limits to Growth, which has been systematically ignored, except by not all ecologists. Do you think, or in what way, is sustainable development not an oxymoron?
I think that's really good, because I think in some ways it is. You sort of think, well, by the very nature, you cannot develop without using up. And if you're using up and not returning to, then by definition, it's unsustainable. But I think as you start to get into some of that deeper thinking around, say, the circular economy approaches, the reparation approach, you start to really see, actually, it's not an oxymoron, it's not a perfect proposition, but I can see what they're trying to point to. And I think that's as far as we can get at this point.
More questions from the audience? Can we open the discussion now with the people online? If there are any questions, please go ahead. I don't have the access to the chat room. Maybe Maria does. Identify yourself and go ahead and ask the question.
Maria's.
She's in her office now.
Yeah, maybe there are no questions. But, I also have a few questions would like to ask Wendy. Again, my understanding to sustainability, which is very broad, it boils down to what we do at the individual level, at the unit level, at the institute level, school level, university level. And I think this has to be approached from bottom up. I mean, if we expect the leadership at the university level to put the goals and objectives, and then this trickle down approach, I don't think it's going to work. And it didn't work. As a matter of fact, it didn't work. So, you know, what would you advise? Let's start from the institute. We're here at the EHSI. How do you advise us? What do we need to do, you know, to start implementing these SDGs in an effective way? And of course, even at the personal level, we have to change the way we approach things, the way we approach teach our classes, a curriculum which has to be more interdisciplinary. I think we're lucky in the School of Public Health or Public Health, all public health professionals, and by design, we are very interdisciplinary compared to some other parts of the university. So I think it's easier for us to embrace. So what would you advise this institute to start doing?
Well, I mean, a couple of things. One is I do agree with you that it has to be driven at that local level of individual faculty, individual. So there are a couple of examples of top down where it's been no more than a permission slip for faculty to do their individual piece. So that's the only ones where that's worked. I mean, I think the other piece of this is to surface current activity. I mean, I think, again, sometimes these conversations start, well, you know, we had thought about that. You know, we've done some stuff in this. You know, so it isn't ab initio as an agenda. So there's lots of work going on now that could simply be surfaced in the way, I mean, you just did it, you know, you surfaced, so well, I'm going to call my course this. There's a lot of work around that. So it's almost like, I hate to use the word audit, but there's almost like, okay, let's just surface some of the things that we're doing here and just surface them and make that clear. And in that surfacing, what happens is you see new connections and you see gaps. And I think School of Public Health is a great space for this because it does have at its heart almost all the disciplines. It's like a mini university. And so it can actually engage in these disciplinary conversations in a way that's much more difficult in other parts. So it can be that vessel that holds those conversations. So I would say start with surfacing what we're already doing and make that really clear, and then use that as a kind of gap analysis. Use that as, oh, I didn't realize those two things were happening. I wonder if we plug them together and got those two people to have a chat with each other, what might emerge? And that's a great way just to kind of go from where it is now to really fast-paced movement quickly. And then you see some directions come out of that. That's where it's worked really well. That's why I use that audit from Yale. They did exactly that at sort of university.
I think what has to happen also is a planned devotion of time to what you're describing, because what it reminds me of is that we did a workshop. I mean, we did a retreat. You know, everybody does a retreats, and then they come up with their strategic plans, and then the strategic plans get put on a shelf and they get dusty. And so I guess you know what I think you're describing is that when you go through that process, you do bring those things to the surface, but then we often get bogged down in the day-to-day details and the day-to-day, you know, economics of running a place without stepping back and making a time and space to do that consistently. And that's what I think doesn't happen.
Totally agree. And that happens so often, I think, in universities, is that we give up all of those really great ideas and that thought and that time to go to those things. And then it's thank you very much. And there's nobody to throw that to say, okay, go make that happen.
Right.
And so that is the space where, you know, is getting all that stuff and then it's throwing it to someone to say, go make that happen. And that's really important. Otherwise, there is you build up a kind of lack of trust of next time you're invited, you think, well, nothing ever happens. So
why bother? Right.
You know, I've often run things in this space which you run this loop which says, you said we did. So I will have an event like that, and it will be like you said we did, so that you actually get feedback that you were heard, and what you were heard was this, and this is what happened on the back of it. And so that's really important, because then the next time you're invited, you're more likely to say, okay, I think I will rock up to that, and actually I'll share again, because now I'm being asked at the next level. And it's also asking, I think, faculty and those kind of gatherings the right kinds of questions. What are we missing? What have we not seen? What, really, tear this piece of paper apart and really do your best work in getting us to the next level. So all that editing, reviewing, all the things that we do very naturally is arguing with that proposition. And I think that's the exciting thing, because what comes out of that crucible is so much better than anything that any one individual could come up with. So
I do think also it's bottom up with students, employees, everyone, I do think that that's where it has to come from and challenging the existing. But I also think when you have certain leaders who set an example and say, this is what, I think of J&J back in the day when they did their, wellness, and that was a priority, it can change the institution.
I know Credo, for example, when I talked to the guy at J&J, and it was very much a lived experience. I think it is a both and, it is bottom up, but if it starts top, it doesn't really work. But when it is a kind of groundswell, getting the sort of permissive, supportive guardrails and that kind of enabling environment is really important. So, having the dean recognize, having that sort of sense that this fits with the broader university agenda is actually critical. Otherwise, what you get is lots of local initiatives that never reach their full potential in making that difference. Yeah, I agree. There was
so I'll ask the same question from a different viewpoint. Most people probably are not aware that Rutgers invested countless man hours, and I served on one of multiple subcommittees on sustainability. And I'm sure somewhere, because I know that we had this monster retreat at the back end, created this huge document on sustainability, volumes and volumes and volumes. The next president who came in, not as priority, gone. So regardless of top down, bottom up, whatever else, how do you keep sustainability on anybody's sustainable when the next initiative is going to come and supplant it?
But in all fairness, I think as a society, we made huge progress in the last 10 or 15 years.
It has changed.
Look at, I think the corporate responsibility has increased dramatically. You have Starbucks now talking about, food packaging.
So Phil, I would argue that we've been fighting this battle of sustainability from an environmental standpoint now for 75 years, Silent Spring. And you can continue to say we continue to make progress because the water's cleaner, we've got more species, we've got all that stuff going on. So to focus on the last 5 or 10 years and say this is when we made a real,
I didn't say the last 10 years. But progress is happening. It's slow, and also when it comes to change of attitudes, it takes generations sometimes.
I think that's fair, but I also think if we continue to see this as a discretionary, we're prioritizing this today, and the next president might prioritize something else. That's kind of setting ourselves up for failure. If we're seeing this as the next normal, the new normal, this is, we have to think about this in different ways. If we're seeing our student numbers disappear because we're not offering, so there are some ways of making this not discretionary. It's the way we do stuff around here, and it's that mainstreaming of this kind of thinking, and a lot of it we're doing already, and it's just surfacing that in a new way. But I do think that the E, S, and G of sustainability, of the environment, social, and governance, we've spent a lot of time, defining the problem around the E, the environment, and getting better at describing the problem. We've really paid very little attention to the kind of socio-cultural spaces around S, the society, and again on the governance, the systems that we're operating, the reward strategies and all of that. So I think we've still got those other two parts of E, S, and G to spend a lot of time on. Frankly, we've got many of the technological innovation solutions to some of those challenges. What we haven't got is the change capacity to uplift them, or the governance structures to get them done. And I think that's part of our problem now.
As far as the E goes, you may want to talk to the guy who just said we've passed the tipping point.
I know.
Okay, well, I guess
Great.
unfortunately we have to.